So I listen to a lot of music, especially lately, where I've been trying to every day or almost every day listen to a new album, an album that's new to me, and expand my creative inventory, I guess you could say, so that as I create myself with my own music and everything, I have essentially more to pull from, more experience, more inspiration, just new music out there. So I had an interview a couple days ago with the drummer from Jeff Buckley's, I think, 1993 through 1997 years, something along those lines. So he was the drummer that toured with him and also recorded on his massively popular album Grace. If you don't know who Jeff Buckley is, most likely know him from his cover of Leonard. Wow. You most likely know him from his cover of Leonard Cohen's Hallelujah. I would say probably what most wildly made that song popular. I would bet actually most people don't even know that it's Leonard Cohen's track. But let's talk about this album. I've heard a couple tracks here and there from the album. I've obviously heard Hallelujah, but I don't know if I've ever really gone and listened to the whole album. So I went and listened to it. I've been because I have my bum foot. You can see the the crutches right there. I've been hanging Polaroids while I listen to these albums, and if you've been watching these videos, you can see it's progressively getting more and more and more with the Polaroids. But let's talk about this album. One of the main things that I want to talk about, we're going to talk about a couple different songs in here that I thought were really interesting. But this is the first album in a long, long time. Again, I've been listening to a lot of music. A lot of these albums I've been listening to for the first time, and I've been like, "Well, this is cool. There's always something I can like kind of learn from, or be influenced by, or just inspired by." But it's very, very, very rare that I go back and hear the song, like hear an album or hear a song, and I'm like, "Cool, I want to hear that again." In fact, or like the next day, or I'm thinking about it, or whatever the case is, it's cool as a learning experience, but it's not necessarily something I might listen to in general. But except for this was the first album where I can't even tell you how long I really liked it, like really liked it, like it was different. There was but it was really interesting, man. And in fact, my wife yesterday, after I listened to this, my wife, I don't know, like 8 o'clock at night, she's like, "So how was your day? Like, what was the highlight of your day?" And I was like, actually, I told the story. I interviewed Jeff Buckley's drummer, and I went and listened to the reason I listened to the album was because I wanted to kind of just familiarize myself with it before the interview. And I was like, and the album was phenomenal. Like that was the highlight of my day. So it was really cool, to be honest. It was really interesting, and I would say the biggest takeaway that I got from it. This album was released in 1994, and the biggest takeaway that I got was the unbelievable influence that I've seen from. I don't know if it's necessarily from this album. I have to be a little bit more versed with the early 1990s musical atmosphere. But I am pretty well versed for what comes after that. And what I would say is, I would say so much. I would say kind of, it sounds like it came from this album or close to it, in the sense of like, again, I'm not super well versed in this time, so like I don't know if Jeff sounded like anybody else for that matter, right? But I hear so much of John Mayer in here. I hear so much of James Bay in here. I hear so much of Three Doors Down and Alanis Morissette and Nirvana and James. Did I say James Bay? Which I believe I'm not sure when Nirvana came out, so don't quote me on that one. But everybody else, I know came after this album. Likely being that they've heard this album, and I hear, oh wow, that melody from Jeff Buckley, that sounds like John Mayer. Meaning, there's a good chance that John Mayer was inspired by a piece of this, or James Bay's harmony was inspired by this, or the strings kind of sounded like Iris, one of those tracks from the Goo Goo Dolls. Really interesting just to see, like, wow, this was a genre, I would say, again, genre-defining album. Again, I'm not super well-versed this time, so maybe, take all this with a grain of salt. But I've been talking to a lot of musicians lately, and we talk about what makes musicians last around in the music industry, and we've kind of concluded on the fact of it being like a genre-defining. Some of the biggest artists are these artists that kind of like create their own genre, create their own sound. They don't sound like anybody else. I feel like what happens is there's this artist that comes and sounds like themselves, whoever they may be, Jeff Buckley, Led Zeppelin, which also, speaking of Led Zeppelin, I did hear some Led Zeppelin influence in here. Like, it sounded, I was like, oh, that could have been a guitar riff with Led Zeppelin. Oh, that vocal melody, it could have been like Led Zeppelin. Again, I'm not saying the copy, I'm just saying influence. All musicians are inspired by other musicians. So, with that being said, you have the original artists where they're like they have their sound. Led Zeppelin sounds like Led Zeppelin. AC/DC sounds like AC/DC. And I would say you have these carbon copies, and just like carbon copies work, the farther away you get from the original, like it's like, oh, this kind of sound, that kind of sounds like AC/DC, and then oh, that kind of sounds like, oh, that kind of. I would say is the less rememberable, if that the less people remember them, if that makes sense. So all that being said, I thought it was really, really interesting. Let's talk about a couple of tracks. I was, to be honest, pretty surprised at the stereo spectrum of it. Like, this album sounded super wide, super huge. You heard a lot of guitars left and right, heavy layered vocals in. I think it was Mojo Pin. No, yeah, I think it was Mojo Pin. Talking about Last Goodbye, the drumming was phenomenal. Really, really cool drumming, like really different. The Corpus Christi Carol was a really interesting, I would say, church ballad, if that makes sense. Like, it really sounded like Catholic church, which I found really interesting because I don't even know how you'd write that. Because talk on that, is the fact that, like, the Catholic Church has a very that genre of music has they use specific melodies. They use specific intervals. For example, something called the plagal chord or cadence, which is the 4-1, the amen kind of thing. Da 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 da. Whatever. The amen is the plagal cadence, like very like Catholic Church. That being said, like, that song kind of had that vibe, and I don't even know how I would begin writing a track that sounds like that, right? So I thought that was really interesting. His guitar playing is ridiculous. His voice is incredible. You go from ethereal, kind of like very, very like angel-like, right, voicing, to very like, like he's pouring his heart out. He's singing pretty rough. Like, I thought that was really interesting. Like, kind of just the broad spectrum in this album. You have things that are super, super intimate, just guitar and vocals, and things that, like, you can't even necessarily recognize what instrument it is. It's so heavily distorted. I thought it was really cool. It covers all aspects. And again, it was also cool to kind of have a cover on the album, as opposed to, you don't see a lot of artists doing covers too much lately that do really well in the music industry. And in fact, I would argue that one of the most recent that I'm super familiar with would be Luke Combs doing Fast Car by Tracy Chapman. That is you can't go anywhere without hearing his version of it now. You see a lot of remixes, I would say, where, like, for example, Kygo might take a Whitney Houston track, but you don't see a lot of like full-on covers, which I think is really cool. I gotta say that one thing I found really strange was the ending. I did not I'm not a fan of fade outs. And I was very surprised that such a big album to end on a huge fade out. In fact, within the last 2 seconds of the fade out, you hear a guitar solo starting, and you don't get to hear any of the guitar solo. I found it was a very interesting way to end the album. But overall, actually, let me say also lastly, the last point, I thought this album was so good that actually during the time when I was hanging Polaroids today, I went back and re-listened to this album. I didn't finish the whole thing again, but because I think it's an hour. I think it's 53 minutes long. I'd spent about half an hour doing it, 25 minutes. Ridiculous. I really genuinely, truly enjoyed it. And I think and I know actually this will be an album that I will absolutely go back and listen to more often, because it's just, I liked it. I really liked it. Thanks for watching. I'd love to know your comments below. Leave a comment. Check out my own original music, and God bless and peace.